Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Dahlgren with you on a short video about the end of World War II instead of live with you on Blackboard Collaborate. Apologize. Hopefully by Tuesday we'll have it all resolved. So today's short lecture is just going to be about the end of World War II. That would be the Holocaust and liberation of the concentration camps, conferences of Yalta and Potsdam, the trials at Nuremberg for the Nazi war criminals, and the dropping of the atomic bomb on 2 cities in Japan. So the Holocaust was defined by what was known as the final solution, which was a plan developed in 1942 as a way to eliminate all Jews from Europe. Jewish people had been taken from across Europe to these concentration camps, and at first they were used for hard labor, but with the final solution, that was the solution that meant that they would exterminate Jews within some of the camps. So some of the camps were known as extermination camps or killing camps. Through the liberation of the camps, the West found out, or the world found out about what was going on in the camps, and the Holocaust became a defining feature of the war, and that's where we get the term genocide from. The Allied forces reached the camp started in 1944. The Soviets from the east and the Western powers from the west. So the Soviets liberated Auschwitz, where more than 2 million Jews were killed. This was in Poland. Soviets continued through Eastern Germany, liberating camps there. The Allied or American forces liberated Buchenwald, which is where Anne Frank was held before she was killed in the camp, and liberated other camps in the west, as both forces were moving in toward Berlin. During this time, a conference was set up in Yalta, which is in the Soviet Union on the Black Sea. Just before the World War II was over, the conference leaders were Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, trying to discuss post-World War II. It was at this time that they set up the United Nations as an organization of most countries in the world. It became most countries in the world. It was supposed to be, or it is, a stronger League of Nations of sorts, so that countries would be would work together to promote peace, but they would have an enforcement security council so that they could enforce peace when necessary. The end of World War II also brought the end of Franklin Roosevelt's term as president. So he died during his 4th term, which is the last time a president would serve more than 2 terms. His vice president, Harry Truman, takes over. And so he's going to have to make decisions in World War II at the end of the war. At the end of the war, Hitler did not make it to the end of the war. He committed suicide just before Berlin was captured. He and his wife, they had just got married, committed suicide by cyanide, and then were shot, or they shot themselves. Bodies were burned, so there's no evidence of Hitler actually there anymore, because it was just ashes. By May 8th, 1945, the Allied forces had entered Berlin, and General Eisenhower accepts surrender by the Third Reich, the Nazis. This is known as Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, and it meant that the first part of the war was over. So the leaders of the Allied forces have to meet again, this time in Potsdam, to decide what to do with Germany. This time the leaders are Truman, Attlee, and Stalin, and they come up with a blueprint to disarm Germany. They decided to divide Germany into 4 sections. Each section would be controlled by either by one of the winners, so France, Britain, US, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, the city itself, would also be divided into 4 parts. And there would be, the Soviets would control the eastern part, and then the others would control the western part. So here's a map of Germany showing you how it's divided. We have 3 zones controlled by the Western countries. That would be British, French, and American zones. The Soviets took over the eastern part of Germany and then became East Germany. So West Germany was controlled by the 3 zones, French, British, and American, Western Germany, and then Eastern Germany was the Soviet zone. You can see here Berlin in the very center of the Soviet zone. Well, Berlin was also subdivided into 4 parts: an eastern part, which was the Soviet zone, and the western part, which was a combination of French, British, and American zones. So the Nazis themselves were also put on trial, and it was a big decision made about who would be put on trial. And so it was decided that the leaders, the major leaders, would be put on trial, but many top Nazis committed suicide, and so were never put on trial. The 22 major Nazi criminals who were tried, they were tried in Nuremberg, which was the capital of the Nazis, and they were tried for crimes against humanity. It was the first time that that was used in a trial. Most claimed to be just following orders, but that defense did not work. 12 of them were sentenced to death for their actions in World War II. Some escaped to South America, where they hid for many, many years. While this is all going on, a project is developing in the US. It's called the Manhattan Project. This is a development of nuclear weapons. It's a secret project to develop, and what developed into the first atomic bombs to be used. So the 2 bombs were dropped in Japan. The first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Hiroshima, Truman had to make the decision how to end the war in Japan, and it was decided, or through all of the information he got, it was decided that dropping a bomb on a city in Japan, even though it would immediately kill tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands possibly, they didn't really know, but there would be an immediate death toll. That was better than a land attack, which would kill 500,000 people to 1 million people. And so Truman made the decision to drop the bomb. It was dropped on August 6th, 1945. In 43 seconds, the city collapsed. Tens of thousands died instantly at that time. The Japanese did not surrender, though. The emperor did not surrender. 3 days later, another atomic bomb was dropped, this time on the city of Nagasaki. And that's August 9th, 1945, leveling half of that city. In total, 200,000 Japanese died due to the atomic bombs dropped on those 2 cities. And that's when the Japanese did finally surrender. On August 15th, 1945, Japan offers unconditional surrender. And on September 2nd, VJ Day, which is Victory in Japan Day, was their formal surrender. The war was finally over. Japan also was occupied after the war. The similar trials were held as were held in Germany for the Japanese war criminals. 7 out of 28 leaders were found guilty. They were sentenced to death, including General Tojo, who was as you know, the one who was known to have planned Pearl Harbor. The U.S. occupied Japan for about 6 years under the direction of General Douglas MacArthur. Within Japan, there was a new constitution that was written, which required free elections and women's suffrage, voting for women. It also introduced a free market economy into Japan. So major changes going on in Japan to help it become a better country after the war, developed so that it became a more capitalist country and a democratic country. So now we have the end of the war. The war is finally over. The world now, however, has nuclear weapons. So the big question after World War II is what to do. What change does this have on mankind? How does this impact our world? How does this make us a new world? And what does it do to our psyche, to our what we think about our relation to other countries, to our relation to enemies, and how can we move forward with this new knowledge? So Mr. O'Grady is going to have some readings for you and some discussion topics, and he'll present that. I'll see you on Tuesday.